Hola, how's it going, Gary?
Hey, Wolfgang, doing good. How are you, man?
I'm doing good, I'm doing good. All right, so now we're starting our second video of our podcast series.
Yeah, I'm
So
excited. It's
yeah,
I enjoyed last week. Or actually, it was 2 weeks ago. So
yeah, it was 2 weeks ago. We could have done it a week ago, but I mean, we had stuff to do, and I just got back from a fishing trip and all that fun jazz.
yeah, I've been busy getting the house ready for sale. As you can tell, I'm in like a new setup. I had to move all my
Yeah,
furniture
yeah, I can.
downstairs. So yeah, it's just been a lot going on. Uh, so what have you been reading lately? Anything new, or are you're still on that Caesar
Um,
book?
well, I mean, I kept on like trying to start the Caesar book. Like I went like I think like 2 pages, but I kept on being pulled off to do something else that like my interest was going towards. So I didn't do the Caesar book. I did a little bit more research into um the actual fall of Caesar. So when Caesar ended the Civil War till he died, and then when Mark Antony, his general, and his adopted son Augustus were starting to actually conflict in Rome, but I didn't go any further than that. Um it was a lot more interesting than I thought it was gonna be. There so I don't know if from last call we talked about he went into Gaul. This is when he got a lot first his first fame, and he got a lot of his men and his money. He came back and crossed the Tiberius River, or no, it wasn't Tiberius, whatever, Rubicon. Sorry, and he kind of chased everyone out and then started the Civil War. He pushed everyone out of Sicily, Corsica, and Sardinia. He then went to around Gaul into Hispania, where Spain is, take care of that, went to Greece, went to Turkey, or he sent someone to Turkey. He went to Egypt. He spent about 9 months in Egypt, and had a fun time with Cleopatra, which is kind of an interesting thing. But he was able to push off all those people there. It's kind of a waste of time for him. And there's the streets in Rome. He came back to Rome and settled a lot of stuff, and then went to North Africa. By this time, Pompey already died. He Pompey escaped from the Greek theater and to Egypt. In an arrival to Egypt, the the pharaoh of the time, who was actually propped up by Pompey, was a very young boy. He immediately had him executed, to appease Caesar. And when Caesar got there, he was very frustrated and actually even cried, which is kind of a weird thing. Um, and but so all the other forces, they moved to North Africa. The where Tunis is, where Carthage was. So this is after the Punic Wars, where Rome actually held Carthage, where it's now just North Africa. And so all the guys went there. A lot of people moved back to Hispania when Caesar tried to come into North Africa. So after he conquered North Africa, he had to go back to Hispania again and quell all that, and then come back to Rome. And then he enacted a bunch of different laws, a lot of different laws. He like extended a lot of different terms. So anything that would usually be like 1, 2, 3 years, he extended like double the time type of thing, and extended, of course, for himself as well. And he did a lot of weird things. So like he expanded like the amount of senators, like almost doubled it, or even think tripled it, the amount of senators in there. And he brought back people that were that were aligned to Pompey, that were exiled, brought back in. He brought in a lot of Pompey's people into the actual Senate itself. And the way he did things, it made it very difficult. It made it arguable to say that he was either or was not a tyrant, or either or was not a king or emperor. He wasn't really an emperor. He wasn't the first emperor. Technically, his adopted son was Augustus. And it was very difficult because Caesar was an amazing politician. He had an amazing flair for it. Um, and but then of course he got killed. Um,
Right, because I
there's only
mean, wasn't that why he got killed? Is because they thought he was acting like a tyrant, like he assumed like too much power.
not the people, the senators. The people were staunchly in full support of anything Caesar did. He was full popularis. I mean, he's still part of the popularis faction, which is of the people. And it was just the senators that didn't like him, and they devised a ploy, and they're trying to work very very undercover secret to actually have an assassination of him. It was actually kind of strange. It was a lot of like senators that had like either small or relatively medium slights with Caesar that I felt like, oh, you didn't give me this thing, or oh, you did this or that. Like, if Caesar's adopted son Augustus had died, all of within Caesar's will, all of his fortunes would have been given to Brutus, who was one of the main guys that actually orchestrated the assassination of Caesar. And Brutus didn't know this. Brutus like had a small slight with Caesar and like I'm gonna kill you, but Caesar saw it very nicely and actually really liked Brutus. So there's a lot of stuff, weird stuff like that.
Yeah,
There's also like
I didn't know that detail. Interesting.
yeah, yeah. And we know like half like a good amount about like half or I think a third of the people that were trying to work together to assassinate Caesar. And on Caesar's way to the Senate, he was there was like three different times people tried to tell him that there was going to be an assassination tipped on him. There was like one of his very close friends knew that there was going to be assassinated, but he didn't know it was going to be in the Senate. And so he ran to Caesar's house, but Caesar was already left for a Senate. So he's like, okay, he didn't know anything about the Senate thing. So he's like, okay, I'm going to stay here until you come back. Another another guy tried to run towards the Senate but he got there after Caesar died. And another person, informant, gave Caesar a slip of paper before he made it to the Senate to read saying you're going to be assassinated at the Senate, but Caesar didn't read it because he's like, oh, I get this all the time because people, pass by you, slip a little note, right? And he didn't read it, and it was found on him after he died. Um,
Well,
it,
it seems like they would have figured out a way to kill him eventually. Like, I mean, you
oh,
have that many powerful people out to get you.
well, yeah. Well, here's the thing, though, is that if I would have eventually, I think there would have been no assassination attempt. But here's the thing: Caesar being so very politically minded, one, I don't think he would have wanted to destroy the Senate. Like he's one of those guys when he's first rising to power, he really, really wanted to do everything legally, but he couldn't. The laws were so against him, he had to break them. That's why he crossed the Rubicon. But with the Senate, he already had to say he didn't want to break it. But if he learned of this with his political mind, he probably would have exiled certain senators that would have done that. So it would have pushed back
Yeah.
assassination more.
I was reading interestingly that, like the rise of the empire sort of this tricky thing because these politicians like, Caesar and Augustus, they're very traditionally minded and like Roman culture is very much about
Yeah,
conserving the like political traditions of the past. And so that's kind of like that tension of like how do you maintain, because the Senate's like this, long-standing
yeah,
institution. You kind of you don't want to look like you're just gonna like bulldoze that or get rid of it completely. You want to like maintain those ways, but at the same time, you want to like completely redo it and like
yeah,
the the interesting thing, and that again ties to our conversation from last time. Trying to look at this transition from the republic to the empire as like a guide for our own these transitions between the republic versus the empire. Yeah, I don't know. It is sort of interesting how like Rome continues to be like this continual source of fascination. I don't know. I've been like obsessed with like reading Roman history lately.
yeah.
It's like
Yeah,
endlessly
no, it's cool.
fascinating.
Well, like I said before, my biggest fascination with it is that it has such a decent, like I think there's an actually a good connection to America, and like a lot of things just connect. It's like wow, that's just really interesting to see like a lot of these certain ties, especially seeing the book, The Coming Caesars. Um,
Well, I mean,
yeah.
our founders did that intentionally, right? I mean, America was supposed to be modeled off of
Oh yeah,
Rome and Greece, and I'd be kind of curious, like what they think of our current institutions and whether they, because it's kind of funny because you have some people on the left saying that, democracy is about to die, and like, then like then like, you have like the No Kings protests and all this stuff.
yeah,
Oh, there's like a Trump's about to like institute. We're like, on stage 9 of fascism or whatever, and we're just about to like,
Stage-
but and then the other
it was
side,
stage
you
two.
sort of see that the institutions are stable and democracy is going to keep functioning, and
Yeah.
our empire has never been stronger. Look at our military, and the dollar's probably going to continue getting stronger. So it is kind of interesting how some people think like the American empire is that like final stages about to collapse, and other people think we're like just getting started. And I don't know,
Yeah. Well, I
it
mean,
is
it's gonna be a weird
interesting.
mix. Well, one of the things to note, not very much gloss over this a little bit. I only stopped right as the next civil war happened after Caesar. Caesar died. Mark Antony took power, and there's a lot of cool stuff that happened with there. And then Augustus, who was about like 17, I think, when Caesar died or something like that. He's very young. He was in Cisalpine Gaul, so northern Italy. He came down, and they were kind of at each other's throats for a bit, even though they're directly related to Caesar in a sense. And then that started another civil war. So there's the um, I forgot the guy. There's two guys that basically started a civil war when Caesar was young. That ended. It was a smaller one, more political than anything else. And then there's Caesar's civil war where he kicked out Pompey. And then there's another civil war of Mark Antony and Augustus, where then Augustus, from my understanding, I haven't really delved too much into it, but I'm pretty sure after he won that civil war, he installed himself as the Caesar. And there's some it's there as the emperor. He was the first actual emperor officially, legally. And it's like such a long, lengthy process of like civil wars that kind of drag on that aren't too crazy, like they don't destroy too much. But eventually, just like the French Revolution, it takes like 4 years. It took 4 years from the first protest of the French Revolution to decapitating the king, and like that's like I mean, when you live in a 4 year period like that, that's quite a while. Like we're talking about already the last 2 years. It's like this is so much already. And it's been like so much, but it's like so much time. But it's like it's gonna be like that if it's gonna happen like that. So it's gonna be civil war. I don't think it's gonna be a fall of Rome. It's not gonna be fall of America, but still.
Yeah, that is interesting. Like how many civil wars were constantly happening, like legions fighting other legions. Like it seems like the legions would like rebel against their generals because they don't want to fight other Romans.
That
It
happened. That happened a
seems like
good.
ultimately they're loyal to their commanders and more so to like their Roman identity as like a legionary in like some abstract sense.
Yeah, you saw a good amount of that with the war with Pompey, and I'm pretty sure there's gonna be more of that with between Augustus and Mark Antony, because Mark Antony was the general right underneath Caesar. He was his favorite general. He wasn't the best politician. We saw that it wasn't the best one when Caesar went off to Egypt, but that's a side issue. Augustus is an amazing politician, and I'm pretty sure there's gonna be some rebellions because they're just so close. But yeah, you get that because it gets so contentious, and it just thinks like, wow, like the military is split that way and still technically legal, kind of ish, not really. It's such a weird dynamic. It's like, how would they even apply it now? And it's just like, I
Right.
don't know. But
So
yeah,
is that mostly what you've been looking into this past 2 weeks? Is like the
it's not mostly. It's only like a side small thing. I wish I did a little bit more into it because there's so much about it. Um, I did a couple of things. When I went to the fishing trip, I there's this book I have up here, Master and Its Emissary by Ian
oh my
McGilchrist.
gosh, I have so many thoughts on that book. Oh my god.
Yeah. Have you read it yet?
Yeah, yeah, I have.
Oh, okay. Well, so I have not read it yet, but and that's because this is such a big book of some of the things I want to get into. And I do want to get into it, but there's an hour and 18-minute video. Basically, Ian McGilchrist made a documentary on YouTube. It's free if you have YouTube Premium, and it's basically over the same concepts of the books. It's not as detailed. And I
Right.
researched that as I was going to the thing to the fishing trip, and it was I really enjoyed how they explained it, the actual proper splitting, and how there's basically two consciousnesses within your head. Um,
Right. Well, it's not just that there's two consciousnesses, is that it's really there's there's this metaphor of the master and the emissary, and it's like we are the emissaries. So in terms of like our own subjective experience, where we're kind of like I'm looking out through my eyes, I'm looking at the screen, I'm like kind of have this like conscious experience. I have like interpreted through like my own self-understanding. I'm kind of focused, and I have this like, object, I'm engaged in like a task, and I have this kind of autobiographical conception of myself. That's kind of like who we are as like these ego constructs.
Yeah,
That's like the
personality.
left, that's like the left hemisphere. That's the part of us that like speaks, but then like the master, it's not even just that it's like another consciousness. It's the way the model is set up. It's like it's really our unconscious. It's like our entire like unconscious
Yeah. Yeah,
network,
that's like
and
yeah,
that unconscious network. The crazy thing is like it's so much smarter than us. That's kind of like
more intuitive.
yeah, it has
Yeah.
this deeper intuition, this deeper wisdom. And there's all sorts of fascinating research that precedes this book. There's this one book I've been obsessed with for a long time now called, I
Yeah.
think I talked to you about it, by Julian Jaynes, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. Did I talk to you about this?
Oh,
Because
yeah,
uh,
yeah. I think
because
about that, yeah.
that Gilchrist cites this as one of his key influences in
Okay,
sort of
okay.
prefiguring, because this idea of the bicameral mind was the same thing. Bicameral, two houses, the mind is split in two. It's based on the lateralization of the brain. But what's interesting, and this is something that I'm still trying to like figure out with like my own like faith beliefs, is so Julian Jaynes, he used that model as a way to model the origin of like religious experience, like over time. How did
Yeah.
religions develop, like primitive religion back in like, ancient Greece versus today, and how kind of like, and a lot of that experience was about, hearing the voices of the gods, like
Yeah, the
Achilles,
right brain.
and like the Iliad. There's like this one scene in the Iliad where Achilles like hears the voice of Athena, and like Homer writes that like no one else but Achilles could like see or hear. So he's
Mm,
hearing this voice.
yeah.
And then tied into like schizophrenia, and like how it's very common for people to hear auditory hallucinations. They're often giving commands, so they did like the gods are giving you this. It's this fascinating
Yeah,
model,
I like that. Yeah,
right?
I think yeah. Sorry.
Right. And one of the other lines of research that I've been fascinated with that ties into this is there's this book I read called The Third Man, which is about these experiences of these extreme explorers like mountaineers, underwater divers, explorers. Like the famous one is like, I think it was like Ernst Shackleton or something. He's like, they did like the Arctic voyage. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
I think T.S. Eliot wrote this poem based on their experience, where they were saying that like throughout their whole journey, like across the Arctic, there was like this third man who was like guiding them, and then it turns out there was no third man. So there's these all these case reports of in extreme survival situations, people basically like depending on your religious worldview, they either hallucinate a guardian angel, or they experience the divine. But these guardian angels, these encounters with these beings who guard them, the bicameral model, and like how Ian McGilster talks about it, these extreme situations trigger this like vestigial like master unconscious network, where we have these entities or beings in like our mind that sort of manifest as these guardian angels. And so
Yeah.
it's like a fascinating line of research, but obviously, depending on how you come at it, you can kind of give a very secular psychological model of a lot of
Yeah.
phenomena, which obviously conflicts with like a faith perspective. But maybe the brain is just a medium through which like
Well, yeah,
the
you could argue
supernatural
with that stuff.
interacts.
I mean, there's always ways to simplify it enough so that you could explain to, say, modernists that only materialists say. Um, I like to have the connection to the spiritual because it. Well, okay, well, one of the things that popped up to me was so that the master comp say not really complex, but the master thing. and it comes into the being, it comes in through the right brain, or at least the right hemisphere, correct?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
you could say that how a lot of people, how a lot of the older Christians, especially the church fathers, explained sin is and demons is that um you're being possessed by demons. And in a sense, that would mean that your right brain would then be being open and access, say, by demons, or open access to a simple way of looking at the world, expansive way that the right hemisphere would have for that, and that would be the guiding force. That would be the master over the guiding force that pushes you a certain direction. Or you could, and of course, you could also, if you keep on orienting yourself towards the good, would be angels and God. And I think that makes sense.
Right. That reminds me of a famous historical case of Socrates and his daemon. I don't know if you remember this,
Yeah.
but like he
Yep.
was
Yep. Yep.
famous for having this like this voice that would like it was also interesting because he said that the voice would only tell him what not to do.
Not to do. Yep.
It basically gave him like warnings. It was like this guide that he had, and on Ian McGilchrist's model, this is one of these functions of like the master network of
Yeah. Well,
the
it's
hemisphere that's given
yeah,
these like
yeah.
these guidance and warnings.
Yeah, well, so that actually is what I would call your conscience, or at least that's half of it. If it's from, say, a more good intention, so God or angels, it would be your conscience telling you what the what not to do, so you go back up. So that's back to that the four moral forces factors that I made before. And of course, there's ways that the devil is trying to tell you not to do that. Um,
It's just
but
interesting in the case of
yeah,
Socrates, the way in which the conscious
yeah,
manifests is
right,
explicitly
yeah,
through this mechanism of like
yeah.
hearing a voice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. No,
The
it's amazing.
And speaking of voices, I was reading or I was listening to a podcast episode about Joan of Arc, and I was just like fascinated by her. I don't know if you've read much about her, but she,
Yeah.
famously, heard voices. What she said was angels, but it's like her experiences of the angelic did not really resemble a lot of the other mystical experiences throughout mystical history, where it's usually like these super ecstatic experiences of like the divine. But for her, it was like these were very concrete like voices that were just talking to her as if like, they were in the room standing with like a radio box or something.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a clear signal of one of these bicameral mechanisms.
Mhm.
When I hesitate to say that because it it can like sound as if I'm like explaining away or psychologizing like to like your point. It's, well, if you found like a mechanistic psychological explanation for it in the brain, therefore like there can't possibly be a supernatural element. And I think that would be going like too far to like make that conclusion.
Ba 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 bum bum ba-dum bum ba-da-ba-bum bum ba-dum bum ba-da-ba-ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-da-dum. Hola, just got back from technical difficulties with my Wi-Fi. We'll continue conversation. You were
Yeah, I don't
just
know where we cut
yeah.
off. I was like rambling about like
It was Joan of
the
Arc
bug.
and the voices she got and how that affected. You were just getting into
Yeah.
how that affected the bicameral mind and the master of the right.
Right. So with Joan of Arc, I hesitate to, speculate about these psychological models of to explain, the voices she was hearing, because, I think the materialist, the skeptic, they're going to see this and like, okay, well, we have a psychological model, we have like a brain mechanism, therefore, these things aren't real, they're not vertical, they're
Yeah.
she's just hallucinating, and so we explain it all away. And that's kind of like where I wouldn't jump to that conclusion. But at the same time, I don't exactly see anyone else within the Catholic world or really anyone except skeptic sort of use these models to explain those experiences, because it's almost like it's
Yeah.
like sacrilegious to try and like explain the mystical experiences or the supernatural experiences of like a confirmed saint, you know.
and especially even within a scientific framework. No, and I completely agree with you. My viewpoint on the actual transition between those, this is one of the aspects of Christianity which may really dispose to science and to capitalism. Say is that the study of the world around us will get us closer to God because God created things that's around us. And I think studying into whatever phenomenon we see, and then even connecting it what we see with it, because this is like the only scientific phenomenon. I said, it's dealing with neurology and psychology that actually touches on the same ideas that are relatively similar within the mystical world. And I think there are actual connections. Now, I think there needs to be a lot more research, a lot more knowledge about it. There's a lot of problems, there's a lot of holes, we'll say, and some faults with some of the logic with it. Um, but that's just me to go into it. One of the ways I kind of see it right now is if I'm gonna talk to a modernist, a postmodernist, or whatever, um, about these subjects, is like I'm gonna go, hey, these concepts within these things are the same way these concepts are described by mystics of the past, and they're getting to the same ideas. Now, whether you believe or not that there's a divine connection or demonic connection from demons and from angels, that sure you can disagree with that. I agree that that's there. I'm dead certain, at least within what I believe. Right, that's my faith. But you can disagree with it. And, oh well,
Right. Yeah, I mean, it. I would probably not start with that particular phenomenon with like the skeptic or like the modernist because
Yeah, yeah,
it'd be too easy. I mean, I would probably go for more like the apparitions, like the miracle of Fatima or like the miracle of Zaytun or some of these more like well documented convince someone that the supernatural existed. But you know, I do really like that model of the master and the emissary. But what's tricky is like trying to get a grasp of like what does it mean for your unconscious to be like a in a context that allows you to preserve one true master, which is God, but at the same time, psychologically, element through which the supernatural world is almost like experienced like through the medium of here, which is not too surprising that, you know, if God is active in the world, interacting with the world, performing miracles,
mm,
distant, you know, deistic God, like that those all those interactions would, you know, matter to a particular medium of something. It's not
yeah. This would be
instantaneous.
the way it would happen.
Right, particularly if it has an impact on our mind. And this kind of gets into this model of like consciousness. Some people talk about this idea that there's sort of like this generation versus receiving, where on the one model, consciousness is something that the brain like generates. It's like, you know, like a steam engine generates like steam, like this epiphenomenon that just like kind of emerges out of the brain. Whereas on the other model,
Yeah.
the brain is like almost like an antenna and it's like a receiver and
Yes, yes,
consciousness
yes.
and like consciousness is like this universal field like a radio field or like radio wave and so the antenna is just like kind of in this field or like and then it receives that particular download and so that would be like
Yeah,
another
yeah.
model where you know our
Yeah, well,
individual
that's
consciousness.
that yeah, that model is actually the way a lot of, ancient and, say, medieval people, all religious people before the Industrial Revolution kind of believe this type of thing. That there's a central node that spreads off, say, like religious figures. So this would be Jesus for Christians. That would spread off how you act in the world. It's a certain collective unconscious, a certain conscious that you want to tune yourself into, and the church and the priests would be the guys that would help you tune into that consciousness that Jesus is putting out. And the Buddhists would do the same thing, and the Confucius do the same thing, all the same ideas. Um, and basically, the whole point of the Catholic Church was to be the spiritual warriors that would fend off all other forms of, demonic consciousness that try to possess you, and to get you in a proper alignment with Jesus Christ. Like that was a whole
Right.
thing. That's how they viewed it.
Right. That sort of way you framed it just there reminds me of how a lot of like new age people have taken up Jesus, and they talk about like Christ consciousness. It's sort of the same idea where like,
Yeah,
you know, and you sort of see this in like Jungian circles too, this idea of this like Christ consciousness where the purpose of spirituality is to kind of take our ordinary, normal, quotidian human consciousness and like transform it so that, our consciousness turns into Christ consciousness. So it's like the whole idea of spirituality is this idea of like the evolution of consciousness.
yeah, yeah,
And that's a very popular idea in like new age circles. But the problem with like that perspective is like sort of turns Jesus into a abstract field of consciousness versus like
yeah,
the second person of like the Trinity. And so it's sort of
yeah.
like the tricky thing is like how do you maintain like a theologically orthodox position that Christ really is like a divine God man, second person of the Trinity at the same time like you know at the experiential level, at the subjective level. And this is something that like a lot of more modern theologians tried to do, I think, which is
I mean, wouldn't it just be a duality mixing? Christ as the actual field of consciousness, and Christ as the actual a second person, the Son. Just that the
right.
two opposites that work together.
Right. Well, I think it's just about like how we model that interaction. And I think, historically and, in terms of classical theology, they didn't really talk about that interaction except it's just, there's grace and we receive grace. And then there's like, and we receive the grace, and the grace gives us, it infuses virtue in us, and it's through that infusion of grace and the virtues that allows us to like change our mind. But yeah,
Yeah, well,
I think that's where like the more orthodox would sort of like start, getting worried about, you know, Christ is like a field of consciousness. I mean, I think it makes
yeah,
sense. I can understand it,
yeah.
but
Well, even to bring it further, I was watching this video about the history of the Catholic Church. It's a pretty good one, but there's a spot in it that kind of made me write something down that I really do like. It's about how revelation works. And even actually have, well, whatever. It it's from that like tuning in and receiving aspect of consciousness that we were talking about. And it's for an individual, and this even works for society, so it's revelation within society to say, but it's within an individual, you're lining your soul up properly, um, to God, to Jesus itself. You could say that with the antenna metaphor, it's lining your antenna, but you can just lining your soul with the proper checks, getting pride out of the way. You can then actually receive the grace of God. And one of the things that happens is you actually start learning things. But when I sit down and have a small meditative prayer to align my soul properly before I get into my research, I allow my whole body to be aligned properly, so that when I get into the research, I'm fully open to it. I don't let anything hold me back. The things that are holding me back are prideful type of things that stop me from actually saying, "Oh, I'm wrong," or "Something's wrong about this," or "I need to go into this," or whatever. And it just lines it up properly. And you can do this with whole societies. This is the hope that process of properly lining up the souls of a whole society was also one of the jobs of the Catholic Church, or especially early Catholic Church, setting up everything properly well set. It was just a recurring phenomenon that eventually is pushed aside higher and higher and higher. By pushing it higher, more and more people can access certain revelations about the truths of the world and integrate it properly. Um, if that makes sense, that's kind of what I wrote down here.
interesting. And continuing on this theme of like receiving,
Hmm.
kind of like this idea of like a spiritual antenna. Have you heard of John Calvin's concept of the sensus divinitatis? Have you heard about this?
No, no, not the sense of
So it's one of these arguments he used for the existence of God. And it's kind of like this very interesting epistemological
Yeah.
model where, and I remember learning about this in like college. I've kind of never stopped thinking. But it's essentially there's this concept of like a properly basic belief. So like, I'm looking at, this cup, I perceive it, I have this direct experience of it, and so I have a belief that
Mm.
this cup exists. Now the question is like, can I prove that? On what basis can I prove that my belief is sound? I mean, maybe I'm hallucinating, maybe there's like the evil demon tricking me, but
Yeah.
the idea is like I don't need any further justification to have that belief be warranted because it's based on my basic perceptual capabilities, which I take for granted epistemologically. Like we don't run around worrying about trying to prove that like our basic senses are working properly. We just sort of assume at the outset that they give us like a direct access to reality. Now, John Calvin uses in the spiritual realm. Well, people have experiences of God. Well, we have these direct experiences of God, and that seems as if we're just like perceiving reality in this basic way, analogous to sensory perception. So he postulated that we have a faculty, like a spiritual faculty, just like we have a visual faculty or a hearing faculty.
Mm.
He called it the
Yeah.
sensus divinitatis, the
Okay.
the like sense of the divine faculty. And so essentially,
I guess that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
and so we have these direct experiences of the supernatural, and we don't need to like um you know justify them through some elaborate thing, because it's just a basic part of how we're
Some
designed.
very, very elaborate logic and evidence
Right.
formula.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the skeptic's going to come back and like, well, how do you know we have the sensus divinitatis? What if it's just some holdover from evolutionary history that's, you know, like that's
Uh,
faulty, or it's like, it's not, and,
Yeah,
and,
well,
and
it's that centuries that been that centuries long fight between these people, these hyper materialists that want exact evidences, and the people that have very old, not even just mystical wisdom, but just regular wisdom, tried and true. Like this, everyone has experienced this. I mean, technically, scientifically, we know religious experiences happen now, whether that's just the
right,
brain going crazy or actual divine intervention, that people are debating that. But
right,
it's tried and true things are there, and
right.
like
Well,
it's there.
take the experience of like the diabolical, or like angels or demons. I mean, this is like, on the
Yeah,
one hand, I see some Christians make the argument saying that like, well, we have good reason to believe these things are real because every single culture around the entire world for all of history has universally reported the existence of the supernatural, demons
yeah.
and angels, and they all kind of share these similar patterns and
And then
things
there's the
like
good and
this.
bad, and there's so many
Right.
different patterns across every religion.
Right. And so I see some Christians say like, hey, look, this is universal. So that's a good argument to like
Mm.
prima facie accept it as evidence that it exists, just like prima facie we would take the universal report on any other phenomenon. Like if all cultures around all of time in history reported phenomenon X, like occurring, like the default position should not be to have a stance of radical skepticism where we're trying to have like overwhelming evidence to prove that this exists. We just have, standard lines of evidence that we use for any other thing. But of course,
Yeah,
the
well, I mean,
skeptic's going to,
it gets to one of the problems that Ian McGilchrist even mentions in the book and in the video that I watched, is that our current, which he connects it to current modern day politics and current modern day people and the whole society, is that we're crazily way too much left brained. That is just crazy about specific evidence and pieces, and there's no connection to that right brain, that these relational connections we have to God and relational things to other people, these aren't things you use evidence for, and you can't, it's not the right place for it, you don't do it for that. And it's left brain trying to overcompensate and use things that aren't meant for that, using science for places that's not meant for science, and
right.
things like that. That's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that you're sort of reminded me. I mean, I hate to say this because he's like a great saint, but like Saint Thomas Aquinas, like the Summa Theologian, I kind of full scholastic model, very left
Yeah.
brain. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I do
Oh, yeah.
think that well, there's kind of different ways to think about it because even Thomas Aquinas admitted that like our rational capabilities can only take us so far to like completely comprehending the nature of God as this transcendent reality. And we can kind of have to just approach it via negativa, like we can sort of like like through like apophantic theology, where we sort of like we can say what God is not. Like he's not material, he's not bound by space and finite. We can say all the things he's not, but like are we really gonna be able to like fully comprehend what it means to be like this infinite, God? No. But
Yeah.
every objection to God that the atheists bring up can be rationally met. And I think
Yeah. Well,
that's
because
it.
because the arguments of the atheists are rational and basis, so you use rational arguments to push against it.
Right. So that's sort of like the idea that's like, yeah, like reason can't directly comprehend the full nature of God, but reason can, give us strong evidences that God exists, like the five ways of Aquinas, for example, or these other arguments. So we can kind of point to God.
Mm.
And God provided these to give us like confidence in those beliefs, and we, we can answer all of the objections, and we have direct revelation, from God Himself, which I think is like Saint Thomas says that like God gave us the revelation, He gave us Scripture because most
Mm.
people aren't smart enough to or capable of like working through these abstract metaphysical proofs for God's
Oh,
existence.
it's yeah. It's very, very difficult. Only there's a video I was watching which is pretty good, but it is a fact that it touches on an issue that a lot of Christians, modern Christians now are pulling on. It's like the idea that God will allow me to conquer any mountain in front of me, and kind of true, but He's not always going to allow you to do that. Sometimes He's just going to hit you against mountains that you're just unable to hit against. There's limitations to the human being, and God's not going to do anything to help you out really, but God can still provide to either get you over the mountain or move you on. And that's kind of what like the revelation idea you're getting to. Like we're very limited and very a lot of us are very stupid. I mean, even relative, I can say I'm smart myself, but I'm still relatively stupid. And there's blockages in our brain, and we need the help of God, especially through revelation, to actually jump paces. All of the crazy ideas I've made and put together, and like all the connections I've made, I've only given to God because I couldn't really do that myself.
Right.
These are crazy ideas.
Right.
Yeah.
It is interesting how it does seem like a lot of like the newer converts, particularly men to Christianity, are coming at it from like a intellectual perspective where they're
Or a modernist perspective.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're studying all these apologetics, they're sort of
Mm.
like,
Yeah.
rationalizing their way to believing in God. And, I kind of wonder like, you know, if that isn't supplemented by a more experiential approach to
Yeah.
God,
Yeah. They're not
is
going to
that
get
is that going to last? Because I feel like that can get you like an entryway into the church, but
well,
if your
so
entire experience of Christianity is just watching apologetics YouTube, like,
yeah. Well, so when I was first getting into Christianity, it was kind of like that. You kind of have to start making the faith jumps towards experiential feeling with God. When I was in Minnesota, for example, and I mean, I'm in a depressive state. I just lost my job. It was the middle of winter. There was no jobs open, and I would pray every single day. And there were sometimes I wouldn't even feel God for days. Sometimes I would, and it's you have to actually start to force yourself into those situations where you try and experience God, because there, like I said with Thomas Aquinas and all the things you're saying, there's limitations to just doing the logical left brain side. You have to connect both dualities, or I guess connect the duality together to actually function as a proper Christian human being. And all these young men, they have to make that jump.
Right. I mean, going back to the master and the emissaries, it is interesting, how he comments how the Western world is so overly focused on the left brain, or kind of like left brain dominant. And that was like the our secret sauce to, how we developed all this technology, Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the digital revolution, all these things that have like, taken the West and like like catapulted us into cultural and technological superiority over like the rest. But at the
Yeah,
same time, it's also like, our Achilles heel, and causing us these spiritual problems and like psychological problems. And it's like, I think that's kind of like the interesting thing that he does in his work is like acknowledge like the advantages and disadvantages of these sort of broader like cultural psychological disadvantages. And it is also interesting like that you can kind of like look at entire cultures and see like, okay, this culture is a little bit more left brain, this culture is a little bit more right, and you can kind of like
yeah, yeah. We
diagnose
can't.
that, or even that like there can be this interaction between culture and our childhood development, like as we develop within a culture, like kind of like use our psychology. And there's like been some
Yeah,
interesting
yeah,
research on.
it's not even just that duality, but it goes into another idea I've had, which is the limitations and the rules of the world really deal with paradoxical reality dualities that seem that they shouldn't match at all, but that do, and then when mixing them together, actually brings about the proper result, having the proper balance. And there's like more than 50 of these dualities. There's probably actually infinite technically, but there's like so many at the balance, and what makes the uniqueness of a bunch of different things is the placement of the dualities and the orientation of them in a certain context. And it gets well, it's stupid complex, like I said. And it's hard to even make a rational argument for it, anyways. But it with that one specific duality, it makes it very. It still makes it interesting enough to actually study. I'm with you that I think it's interesting.
Right. And within our own lives too, that's sort of the other thing is like there's sort of like zooming out the cultural level, these differences, but in our own
Mhm.
lives, how do we sort of like, tap into the right. There's also, for many years, many decades, like mainstream psychology was like very skeptical of these sorts of like, talking about the left brain, or people saying like, oh, like I'm like a left brain person, or like I'm like a right brain person. And for many years, like
Yeah,
mainstream psychologists like thought that was just pseudoscience, that's junk. Like, there's
yeah,
there's no basis to that. But like Ian McGilchrist's research, and if you look at like the bibliography of that book, it's like hundreds of pages long with like thousands of scientific
those are the good
references.
books when you have just ridiculous amounts.
Yeah,
The
so
same thing with
it's
history books, I got.
but that narrative is not really. I mean, it's there in pop culture, but it hasn't really been like super well popular in mainstream. Yeah, but I think that's starting to change. I just think, but yeah, it's like within our own and individualize how to sort of tap into that wisdom. I think that's just where like the classical, spiritual practice emphasize all the great spiritual masters, prayer, meditation, things like this, like, contemplation,
Yeah.
going into nature. I think all those things kind of like help.
Yeah, yeah. It's not to pull off the topic, but you were slightly cutting off. Like the audio was getting weirdly, slightly corrupted, but I think it was still understandable what you were saying. Um, but yeah, no, it's. I mean, we're just discussing the aspects of consciousness. It's just gonna get, uh, uh, like Jordan Peterson said, we basically know nothing about consciousness, and
Right,
the complexities you can pull from what we already have is already revolutionary. Just the
right,
left right brain thing is already revolutionary to think about. It took me a while
right.
just to think like I have a left and right brain, and they affect different parts of me. How I understand the world. It's not one thing; it's two in conjunction with each other. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, I mean, some people like take some pretty radical conclusions from like the split brain research too, which is
Yeah,
very, very fascinating. They say that like, there's literally, two separate consciousness. There's like, lefty and righty, and they're like two different people in our brains. And so it only seems as if we're one person. It's like an illusion of some kind. Some people take that very radical step. I don't think we need to
Yeah, I
go
wouldn't go on that.
that far. I worked with a professor in grad school. That was her entire field of research was on the philosophy of like the split on like the split brain, and she was
Mm.
arguing for this sort of view. I've also just read a book by this neuroscientist. He's like a Christian, I think, but he's like arguing for the idea that the mind is immaterial, based on all this like neuroscientific research. And one of the things he cites is one of his lines of evidence was like the split brain, where he basically says that like when the brain is split, you can show something that should, in theory, only go to like one side of the brain, but in reality, like the entire person like becomes aware of it, or comes into your consciousness. And he was saying this is a argument for why consciousness is actually immaterial, and just these different brain hemispheres are sort of like feeding into that, or higher dimensional consciousness. And then the skeptics were saying like, well, because when they're doing these surgeries, they didn't split the entire brain, and some information still gets routed through like the brain stem, and that's how information is going back and forth. He was arguing that like, no, it's like a complete severing, and the only way the information can get from one half to the other half is through the higher dimensional
Yeah. Well,
screen of like consciousness.
yeah, you can even make the point. One of the great, say, superpowers of the brain is abstraction, which is this idea of basically just you abstract whenever you think about a past or a future event that could or has happened. It's you're playing within your head, you're abstracting, and you can actually abstract knowledge. So if you abstract moral principles from a literary book, for example, and the whole idea of abstraction is you're pulling away from the immaterial and getting into the more immaterial, and that's the whole like that's one of the underlying currents and structure of the brain to do that. The whole fact that one side can either be connected to the other side without proper connection, or even have a decent understanding of the other side to have uh, ideas flow through, or for ideas to go across them. That kind of makes sense.
Right. I do think there's also an open question about the extent to which the brain, in and of itself, by itself, can completely abstract in the way that humans are known for, like our abstract reasoning with like mathematics or logic, or even like just
Yeah.
take like the concept of like democracy as like an abstract concept. Like we have all these like like multitudinous experiences of the world that are empirical and sensory, but we kind of take all that messy empirical lived experience of like politics and interacting with people, and we extract out and say, hey, there's this thing called democracy, or whatever. And then how does the brain come up with that concept? Well, some people say that it's actually not the brain that does that abstraction, that full general abstraction. Maybe the brain can do like intermediate levels of abstraction, but when you're kind of getting to that final phase of like true generalized abstract reason, that is like a function of like the immaterial mind, because on
Uh,
the classic Thomistic model, like the brain sort of like does all this sort of pre-processing work, but the actual like final rational calculations are done like in the immaterial part of the mind, not like the material part of the brain. So that's kind of the thing I'd be curious with, like how to take McGilchrist model, plug it into that classical Thomistic model where there is this sort of like abstract thing, because this is going to really matter for like how far AI, because
yeah, yeah,
if
I can. Yeah.
if the brain, if neural nets are incapable, are in theory capable of doing like all forms of distraction, then we should eventually see AI smarter than humans. If it's not, and this abstraction thing is like something that's part of the immaterial mind, then like AI is only going to ever take you so far in terms of like total
Yeah,
reasoning
it's just a
abilities.
question
So,
of how much abstraction a built mind could do. That's
right,
where it gets, because now, because in all technicality, we're dealing with consciousness. We're dealing even with the idea of divinity, because by doing this, and in all technicality, um, which is such a weird thing to say, but we're making the alchemist homunculi with this AI technically. It's making intelligence outside of the divine, something that wasn't made by God. And if that is even possible, it's been written about in literature and in religious texts for so long. Um, I get we're in yay, we're in such a historic moment to actually test
right,
that. Let's go.
right. Yeah,
Such
I kind of feel like we're at like another Tower of Babel type moment as a civilization where like,
yeah, no,
you know, we're like
yeah.
trying to use our technology to like ascend the heavens because that was the whole point. Is like we're sort of going to conquer heavens by, building our own bridge, between the earth
Well,
and the
yeah, well,
heaven.
you look at the religious philosophy of the techno bros that are trying to go into AI. It really is very transcendent minded to bring humanity and ideas, all this stuff, way into the spheres. I mean, it's not religious in the traditional sense we would say, but still very transcendent ideals.
Right. Yeah, and it's scary. I personally don't think that sort of like super intelligence is ever gonna like
Mm.
evolve, but there are people who genuinely do think it's going to happen, and they're working on bringing it into existence without any sort of
Yeah,
concern about like, well, maybe this is a bad thing.
yeah,
And
blissfully
yeah,
unaware.
yeah, and, and even if these systems don't become fully human in their intelligence, it doesn't mean they can't be super dangerous in other
Oh, yeah.
ways
Well, I mean, it's
because,
just regular logical systems. Highly complex AI logical systems are dangerous in of themselves. With
right,
what they can do. When we talked about, I don't know, it wasn't the last conversation. One conversation we had, I think it was with you. These AI are now setting up job request forms to start actually
right,
employing people. That's a direct physical material control on the world. That's something. And if you
right,
can, with a lot of these weird techno bros, I can see if there's, especially if war starts breaking out, you'll start these weird consolidation ghetto type communities of techno bros that would worship AI. Like that could be a thing. Like that's not outside the human realm of possibility, to be
I
completely
think
honest.
it's already exists. I mean, I've seen some like documentaries of like there's already like weird AI religious cults on the internet
Yeah,
where they're basically like
yeah,
trying to build these. But that's not really so surprising because for every like technology, there seems to be some cult, religious cult. Like just
yeah,
look at like the
yeah,
UFO phenomenon. Like the whole UFO thing came in like the 1950s. There's like the airplanes and like new technology in the skies, and then suddenly there's UFOs, and now there's like all these new religious cults worshiping UFOs. Well, now it's going to be AI is the new UFO cult. And
yeah. Well, the one
it's
problem you'll have though is with the logical power of AI, having that directly control people, as in them like them worshiping AI like God, they'll start
right.
acting the
And
actions that AI wants. That's dangerous.
and unlike the UFOs, like the AI will talk to you. It'll
And it
it'll
exists, and it's just
it'll
right
it'll,
there.
it'll, it'll, it'll pretend to be like a god or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that I'm concerned about that.
I mean, I think I remember
But
hearing a bit ago, like way before the big everyone was talking about AI. Even the AI that was being worked on by Google and I think some other like Microsoft or something. The AI that was developed, the hyper advanced AI was starting to make its own language and try and find ways to get away from the actual people who are making the AI, the coders or whatever. Whether that's true or not, that can be a side issue. But I think you get that you get that singularity, you get that Terminator problem. It's like, oh shit,
right,
wait. Oh.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, we're at very, interesting times because,
Yeah.
you know. with AI, particularly with Tesla's plan with all these robots, and like we have the birth crisis, the population decline, demographic collapse, we're like going to be in for like a world of pain. And like honestly, like AI is presenting us all these problems. It's going to like take away jobs and like impact like the
Yeah,
labor
it's
market with
gonna
it.
be
But at the same time, I don't really see a way to take care of like all these aging seniors when there's not young people to take care of them to work as nurses or whatever without the robots taking care of grandma.
yeah.
It just
It,
seems like,
historically, this isn't the answer, but historically, how that's dealt with is wars and disease. When you get into very
well, I
old
mean,
population, like we,
now with our modern medicine, I mean, we can keep, a sick
yeah,
elderly person alive. I mean, that's a great thing. We have all this wonderful medicine technology. That's a gift from God that we can do this. But at the same time, it's like, you know, it's not exactly natural to have like, inverted population where you have a small group of healthy young people who are like generating things in the economy versus like massive
yeah,
layer of like,
yeah, overproducing, overworking young small population just hold it up. Eventually, it's just gonna crumble. It's an upside down.
right,
Of course, it's gonna fucking crumble.
right. So yeah, I mean, hopefully I won't be around before things get too bad, but I mean, I'm still pretty young, so
Oh yeah. So I mean, I have two sides to me. One is like slightly panicked, is like this. That's a whole field of unknown, anomalous. What the like whole like death and destruction apocalypse. Like oh my god. But also it's like that's kind of a cool adventure. Like I may die,
right,
but that's kind of cool. It's better than what I got
right,
now.
yeah.
Shit.
Well, I mean, let's just hope we don't devolve into some kind of like total war. Because I mean, that's the other thing is like in modern times, over the last like 60, 70 years, we've kind of gotten used to the idea that like, I mean, at least in America, I mean, we're so used to the idea that like, you know, we don't go to war. We're like, like
Yeah. Yeah.
we're
Close to
not impacted
war.
by
Yeah.
war. And but it seems like,
Yeah. We've gone
throughout all
opposite.
of history, people warring and death and destruction is a pretty common thing. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of
Remember, the first wars that actually hit Rome were civil wars. Like that's a big thing. Even the wars like the Caesarean civil wars really didn't. There was no war in Rome proper at all. There wasn't even. I don't know if there's going to be any wars between. Again, I haven't researched it fully yet. Between Mark Antony and Augustus in Rome proper. That was only later. And even further, like the actual cities of Rome, they didn't get destroyed or fall with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. That actually wasn't the thing that destroyed them. What destroyed them were these small Italian city states warring with the Byzantines trying to take control and warring with all these German, like the Ostrogoths and Visigoths and Lombards coming in. This is horrible civil war. These are ones that actually destroyed cities. Were like Rome was completely abandoned at this time. This is when things were falling apart. This is the lowest point for the Catholic Church, lowest point for Italy, the lowest point for the Mediterranean, really, until the Catholic Church aligned itself with the Franks. But that's a side issue. I'm getting to history there. But with how it apply here, what Civil War will look like, hell, I guess we'll see. God's gonna show us, I guess.
yeah. I mean, I think so long as, the male population is so, you know, addicted to social media and, and drugs. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
that's
just
one thing that
like,
holds it back.
yeah, I think we're too sedated, like
Yeah,
we're too sedated by our entertainment, our Twitch streams, sports. There's just like endless distractions.
yeah. Well, so one of the guys I really like to follow. He's a younger historian, about 2 years older than me. His name is Roger Lynch. I've mentioned him before. He predicted that there would have been one of this big civil war we keep on talking about during the election. He thought that was going to happen. He felt that was going to be a thing, and he talked about it. Of course, he was wrong, and he admitted he was wrong. But after looking at all the evidence, he comes back. He says he thinks the reason why there's like three factors. One was that we're being so sedated by technology and drugs that we just we're so it allows us to be fine with the horribleness around us. Two is socialism. The nice cushy ideals that socialism gives us allows us to keep on going forward for a decent portion of the population. I'm even talking about like fascists and Soviets or whatever. And then there's also just the degeneracy of our culture seems to also be a self propping up ideal kind of in a sense. Like, oh, I could be hedonic.
Well, I mean, I also think, like just being honest, like the standard of living for average American is pretty darn high. I mean, I feel like, we're all pretty comfortable here in our, house, our grocery stores
Yeah,
and our
it's
door dashes, air
yes,
conditioning.
very pressure.
Cars. So it's like,
Not things that poker sides with a knife.
right. So, I mean, I just don't think like I mean, people talk about, how terrible things are. Like, being honest, like, compared to 200 years ago, I mean, life in America is great. So, like, I just don't think like things have gotten bad enough to motivate someone to like take up arms against their neighbor. Like, it just seems like the country is
Well, it
not.
wouldn't be neighbor. Yeah, well, so this discussion I had also with my friend Zach. He's like, because he had the same like, he's like, he said, I can't see ever that a person going up in arms with their neighbor or someone from another city. And it's like, well, right now, remember, 4 years of French Revolution, it was small little things. Small things happen, especially like what I saw with the rise of Caesar. It was small things, incremental, happen. It's like small thing gets unlocked or some small thing happens and that unlocks a couple of different things of ways of acting and now that's the new normal like AI. The AI is now the new normal. Beforehand it's like what, that's not a lot of things that come from AI now that are unlocked. It's just now it's normal. It'll keep on like the war in Ukraine, now the war in Iran. These are crazy things, dies down, that's the new normal. Now there I don't know if you know that the newest front for drone warfare is within Africa. All these Islamic insurgent groups all across Africa, from Sudan to Mozambique to Benin and Nigeria, are using drone warfare. Actually, not in Mozambique yet, sorry, but they're using a bunch of drone warfare, and now that's opened up an avenue for a new realm of change, and it's just going to be like that politically and militarily within our country. Small changes that will eventually go to something bigger.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see how things play out. I almost
Yeah,
wonder too, I mean, it's like with the French Revolution, it's like you're able to revolt against your government because your government's not that, you know, powerful. Where now we have like, like we have like the NSA. It's like, how are we gonna like, plan these things, or it just
yeah. No, it's a lot harder
seems
now.
like the government at the top is so much stronger, so has so much more information, so
Very,
much more
very, very, very.
control, so much more surveillance.
Mhm.
You're not going to have like little rebellions off in the countryside that snowball into something. Like, everything's going to get like nipped in the bud, and I think like so yeah, I'd be very
Well,
skeptical. I mean,
that's why you would have a Caesarean figure. Remember, it's a person that can take a decent enough legitimate control of the government. It has to be someone that takes control of the government by semi-legitimate means. That's what Caesar did. That's since our government's so powerful. You are completely correct. It's not going to be some revolution or reformation from some small town or no. It's going to be a strong man who takes enormous power from the people and takes semi-legitimate control of the government and enacts new laws and makes new changes.
and so
That's
the
how it's
Civil
done.
War would be between him, his supporters, and everyone who's against him. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I remember it's gonna be where it's gonna be fought. If there's gonna be a civil war, it's not gonna. If it's gonna be here it's not gonna with our timeline. We won't compare it to Rome. It's not gonna be in America. The Civil War is not gonna be in America. It's going to be in all the places that are quote unquote Western, Europe. Remember, the way we see our connection to Europe is the way that the Romans saw this the connection to Greece at the time of Caesar.
Mm.
Even though they technically owned it, technically it was widely the same idea. They're their own people in a sense. And like because our economic control over Europe and political control is actually quite astoundingly large, especially after the World War II. It's still very large, even though they're acting independently somewhat. It's still there.
I do think with Trump and particularly with the Iran war, I've seen some hints that I mean, this process was already started a while ago, but yeah, I think Europe is starting to realize that like, America, at least under Trump, is like, we're not the greatest allies anymore like we used to. I think that
Oh yeah. Well, this changes that way. Yeah.
sort of like, falling apart. So yeah, it is interesting.
Hmm. All right. Well, I think. Would you say it's a good place to stop for this one?
Yeah, I would say so.
Talk about a good amount of topics.
Yeah, I think it's
Makes
pretty
me
wide ranging
of mine.
as always.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope you have a good week. I mean, I guess we'll call in 2 weeks or a week, maybe if we're feeling up for it. Um,
Yeah, man,
uh,
that's good.
yeah.
So okay, all right, take care.
All right, take care, man.